Hey guys, so in just a moment I'm going to show you every single book on my shelf right now that I have not read yet. I have no idea how many books that is, and I'm going to show you each and every one of them. But before we get into that, I also just want to real quick give you an idea of what my kind of book resolutions for 2015 are. The main resolution is to read every single book I'm about to show you. I want to read every single book on my shelf, regardless of what it is, before the end of the year. I am pretty sure I can do that like before the end of the year, but at the same time I'm not completely sure. There are more books on my shelf that are unread than there have ever been in my entire life. Like, I just have so many books that they're just kind of piling up, and I really just want to sit down and read them all before I go out and get anything else. And that is one of the other resolutions I have, is not to buy anything for a while, at least until I get through the vast majority of these books. And there's only two exceptions to that rule. Actually, there's three exceptions. The first one is if it's a sequel to something that I already own. If there's a sequel to a book that I'm about to show you that I don't have or something and I want to read it, then I will allow myself to get it. The second exception is if I'm in this buddy reading group on Voxer. It's just me and a bunch of other booktube friends, and we have this spreadsheet filled with books that we all want to read together. And if there's a book on there that I really want to read but I don't own yet, I will allow myself to get that book. The third exception is audiobooks and library books. I have a subscription to Audible, and I'm just going to I have 2 credits a month for Audible, so I'm going to use that to get audiobooks from Audible. I have Overdrive to get books from my library, ebooks from my library, and audiobooks. I have a Kindle now, so I can get ebooks. So I won't count audiobooks or books that I get through the library in that. But other than that, I do not want to buy anything else until I've significantly reduced everything that's on my shelf. I know everybody says that, and it's difficult to stick to, but I think I can stick to it. Usually in the past, I've said this before, I only ever went and got books when I didn't have any left on my shelf to read. But this year with BookTube, it's gotten pretty crazy. I just have a lot of stuff, and I'm going to show you everything. There are a bunch of series on my shelf right now that I want to get through entirely this year, and of course you're going to see those. One of them is like the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. It's a 10-book series. I showed them in my Christmas book haul. I'll show them to you again now, and I want to read one book of that every single month until I finish it. There's also the Chronicles of Thomas the Unbeliever, Dragon Riders of Pern, and a few other series that I want to get through this year. Another sort of goal is I have a lot of fantasy. A lot of stuff I'm going to show you is fantasy, but there's also a lot of stuff that isn't fantasy, and I would really like to make sure I have a diverse reading every month. Like, I don't want to just stick to fantasy. I kind of want to make sure I put in other books that are not fantasy into everything. There's a bunch of classics on my shelf that you'll see that I really want to read that I got for Christmas. I don't have an exact idea of what the audiobooks I'm going to get are. I'll just kind of show you what the audiobooks I plan on getting and listening to are month by month, like in my TBRs for every month. And I'll tell you what I ended up listening to every month in my monthly wrap-ups. But that brings me to my last goal. Is I set a goal of reading 100 books on Goodreads this year. Last year I set my Goodreads reading goal to 60 books, and I ended up reading 79, but I very recently discovered audiobooks that I really like listening to audiobooks, and so I set it to 100, and that means just a tiny bit less than one physical book and one audiobook every single week, which I think I can do more than. So honestly, it might even go above 100, but 100 is where I would really be happy with. And like I said, that is including physical books and audiobooks and ebooks. We'll see where that number goes in a few months. Maybe I'll be able to bump it up a little bit if I realize that I'm reading a lot more. I think the most I can expect myself to read and listen to is 6 physical books and 6 audiobooks a month. There might be a little bit more sometimes, it might be a little bit less sometimes, but that's the average that I kind of imagine that I'll be able to do, which when you add it up is more than 100, but that 100 definitely is the goal I would be happy with. Another thing is that buddy reading group. We're going to read a ton of books this year together, which I'm really excited for. We have a spreadsheet, like I said, of just a ton of books like throughout the entire year. I'll put a link to all of the booktubers in that group in the description below so you can check all of them out, because they're awesome, and I'll be mentioning them a ton this year because I'll be reading a lot of books with them. And of course, I'd also just really like to continue being active on BookTube. It's almost been a year. At the end of January, it'll have been a year on BookTube, and honestly, I can't freaking believe it. It was about, like, right now, this time of year, that I was really starting to think about making a BookTube channel. I had just discovered it very recently and wanted to make one, and was kind of deciding whether I wanted to actually do it or not, and then I finally did decide to do it. So yeah, without further ado, here is every unread book on my shelf. Alright, here we go. So we're going to start here with this shelf. I've read basically everything on the shelf. This is my Stephen King shelf, plus a little bit of Joe Hill there. The only things that I have not read on the shelf are these first 4 graphic novels in the Dark Tower graphic novel series. There's The Gunslinger Born, The Long Road Home, Treachery, and The Fall of Gilead. Down here is like the second half of my Stephen King shelf over to the left, and I've read everything in there. But there's a bunch of books over to the right here that I have not read. Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane, In the Night Room by Peter Straub, Stories for Nighttime and Some for the Day by Ben Laurie, Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien, Orphan Train by Christina Baker Klein, The Given Day by Dennis Lehane, and Live by Night by Dennis Lehane, Stardust by Neil Gaiman, American Gods by Neil Gaiman, The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, and Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Then this next shelf is like literary fiction and some classics, like modern classics. The books that I haven't read on here are The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, Bleak House by Charles Dickens, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, Moby Dick by Herman Melville, Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, East of Eden by John Steinbeck, Ulysses by James Joyce, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, and The Complete Stories by Franz Kafka. And actually there's one more I almost forgot, and that is Only Revolutions by Mark Z. Danielewski. This shelf is a tiny bit random, other than the Pendragon series over to the left, which I've read the entirety of. This kind of has some literary fiction, some classics, some modern classics, stuff like that. The books that I haven't read on this shelf are The Sirens of Titan, Breakfast of Champions, Mother Night, and Player Piano, all by Kurt Vonnegut, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. This shelf on the bottom here is a tiny bit random as well. There's some short fiction, some non-fiction, some just random stuff, and some religious stuff. The stuff that I haven't read on here is Anthem by Ayn Rand, Across the Universe by Beth Revis, The Satanic Bible by Anton Zander Levy, the Bhagavad Gita, which I've partially read a little bit of, I need to finish it, the Bible, which I read a bunch of this year but haven't finished yet, A History of God by Karen Armstrong, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, and God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything by Christopher Hitchens. So that's that entire shelf, and if you're wondering, that big stack of books right there are mostly books that I want to get rid of, but some of them are just books that I have no place for at the moment. I need to find places for them. And before we get to this shelf over here, I'll show you that I have a bunch of books sitting over here. These, I think I've read all of these for the most part. I put a lot of my YA books over here, and some books that aren't YA, but I just didn't have a place for them because they're weirdly sized or just didn't fit anywhere else. Alright, so this top shelf up here has the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen series on it, plus the Song of Ice and Fire series. The only book I haven't read in A Song of Ice and Fire is A Dance with Dragons, and I'm not going to pull it out because it's difficult to get them back in when you pull them out. And I'll give you a close-up look of all of the Malazan Book of the Fallen series real quick. Gardens of the Moon, Dead House Gates, Memories of Ice, House of Chains, Midnight Tides, The Bone Hunters, Reaper's Gale, Toll of the Hounds, Dust of Dreams, and The Crippled God. The vast majority of this shelf, this entire shelf, is fantasy. So these are like fantasy books that I haven't read. The Folding Knife by K.J. Parker, The Mirror Empire by Cameron Hurley, Winter's Tale by Mark Helprin, Saga Volumes 2 and 3, Hellboy, The Chained Coffin and Other Stories by Mike Mignola, Bone by Jeff Smith, and Persepolis 1 and 2 by Marjane Satrapi. This shelf is my Brandon Sanderson shelf. Dune is there right now because it's a really weird shaped book and doesn't really fit anywhere else at the moment. And there's a big space right there because I just ordered on Boxing Day on Book Outlet, I ordered the 2 US hardcover editions of Wave Kings and Words of Radiance, so those are going to go there. And I have a little bit of room for Firefight, which is the sequel to Steelheart. And the only books on the shelf that I haven't read are Steelheart, which I literally just started reading, and The Complete Alcatraz. This next shelf is a bunch of mass market paperback fantasy books, most of which I haven't read and really hope to read this year. Lord Thal's Bane, The Illith War, and The Power That Preserves, The First Chronicles of Thomas Conant the Unbeliever, all by Stephen R. Donaldson, Dragonflight, Dragon Quest, and the White Dragon, the first 3 books in the Dragon Riders of Pern series by Anne McCaffrey, The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King, Seventh Son, Red Prophet, and Prentice Alvin, all by Orson Scott Card, Dorsai and the Spirit of Dorsai by Gordon R. Dixon, Surveillance and Meta Concert by Julian May, Damiano, Damiano's Lute, and Raphael, all by R.A. McAvoy, The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge, Startide Rising by David Brin, and Shadow and Claw by Gene Wolfe. These last 2 shelves are mostly photography books and filmmaking books and some manga, and I've read all of those. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've read anything that I just showed you, tell me what you thought about it. I'd love to hear it. And yeah, I'll see you guys very soon.